The day it all began was ordinary, but everything changed forever. Maria woke up thinking it was just another morning in Lagos sunlight, crept through the small curtains. Her hands still shook from the night before, tears and anger mixed in a quiet storm in her heart. She remembered the last week Mark, her husband, smiling, faking love while he hid more than secrets from her. She had always trusted him, but that trust was now a shattered mirror, broken in pieces, lying all over her life. She walked to the kitchen, pouring herself coffee, hands shaking as images of flashing smiles between Mark and her own sister played in her head. Memory hit fast and hard, the laughing, the touching, the promises she believed in. The flashbacks were not kind. Mark and her sister Lillian, laughing at her back when he kissed her goodnight. She remembered that night perfectly. The morning wake up, watching her own life being betrayed in the quiet of their bedroom. Betrayal is not sudden, it is 1,000 little cuts blending into unbearable pain. She grabbed her notebook, writing her feelings as if each word might cure her heartache. But writing was not even enough. She decided to confront Mark later that day. Lagos traffic buzzed around her like the world did not care for heartbreak. Her feet stirred with hesitation as she approached the truth, or remained blind longer. She found him at the office. Just like before, smiling, his eyes avoiding hers. He was present, but his heart was not. She breathed deeply, telling herself, this is the moment. It was the moment that changed everything. Maria, Mark, we have something to talk about. He chuckled as she entered, doubt shows in his eyes. Finally, she asked the question, that one question that would change moments forever. How could you betray me with her? His smile broke the air, laughing softly. Yes, with your sister. She could feel it was not the money or the power, but the mockery that cut her deepest. She left without words. She stood in the marketplace, clutching her bag, feeling like a piece of herself had been stolen. Her friends who watched warned her, but nobody could fix what Mark had broken. He continued his life without consequence, going to work, laughing at parties, acting like everything was normal. Meanwhile, Maria was dying inside. Every smile was a sharp blade. Every conversation with family faked hearts. She found herself alone in the nights, staring at the ceiling, crying softly, remembering the nights when she might be wrong, thinking love was enough. Her family advised her to stay strong, but strength does not come from ignoring pain. It comes from facing it with eyes wide open. She decided to save herself and her future using quiet discipline and care. Her work began from home, advising small traders, consulting businesses, slowly gaining respect and trust. People respected her for her mind, not her heartache. She learned that revenge was not immediate, but patience was her weapon. Months passed. Mark continued living in the illusion of control. He thought Maria was weak and invisible, but Maria built her foundation silently strong, not visible, but immovable. Her first big break came when she inherited a share of an old family business unrelated to Mark. Without fanfare, without Mark's knowledge, she held the papers, quietly watching the riches grow, sensing the power that came from her own hands. The foreshadowing of what was coming began when Mark approached her business asking for investment. She looked at him and smiled, without words, not because of joy, but because finally the game had shifted. Her strength was not the wealth. It was the knowledge that the woman he mocked was the one holding the keys. And so Maria waited. The clock ticked, each second full of foreshadowing, full of suspense. And in that quiet Lagos morning, she realized one truth. The woman who cried herself to bed did not belong to the losers. The woman who cried was becoming the queen of her own empire. The weight of silence after the betrayal. Maria Williams did not immediately rebuild herself. There was no sudden strength, no miracle morning, no applause for surviving. The pain arrived quietly, like a heavy fog pressing against her chest. Every day she woke up, the memory of Mark and Lillian haunted her like a shadow. She could see his smile, the way he touched her sister, the way he laughed at her. Heartbreak. She moved through Lagos streets feeling invisible yet exposed. She went to work pretending normalcy, but inside every laugh, every casual conversation cut like a knife. She remembered the nights she sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the pillow, silently crying, wishing someone could see the pain she hid from everyone. Her friends advised her to move on, but moving on seemed impossible. The wound was too deep. She could not forget the flashback of them together. The betrayal was constant, like a replaying video in her mind. Even in the marketplace, when she walked past familiar faces, her heart ached for the trust she had misplaced. She started to write everything in a notebook, hoping the words would carry away the anguish. But writing could not undo the humiliation nor the loss of faith in someone she loved deeply. Every day she felt anger and sorrow intertwined in her veins. It was during these long nights that Maria decided she could not remain broken. She had to survive. Not for him, not for her sister, but for herself. She turned to work quietly, helping small traders, managing their finances, consulting with business owners, offering advice she had learned through years of observation and careful study. Slowly, she gained respect from people who saw her intelligence and diligence. She discovered that patience was more powerful than rage, that silence could conceal more than confrontation, that the foundation of survival was built on steady, quiet action, not public declarations. Months passed, and her strength grew imperceptibly. Mark continued his life unaware. Maria was silently gathering influence and power. Every smile he gave at parties, every public show of wealth and success did not affect her anymore. Her focus was inward. She learned that revenge was not about showing him what he lost. It was about becoming someone he could not ignore. One afternoon, she received a phone call from David Cole, a client she had helped long ago. He spoke cautiously, mentioning a business opportunity, a redevelopment project that could yield substantial returns. She listened carefully, noting every detail. Her hands trembled slightly, not from excitement, but because this was the first time she felt control returning, the power to choose her future and shape her destiny. Without anyone laughing or mocking, she investigated quietly, checking documents, consulting trusted colleagues, ensuring every step she took was precise. Months later, she realized she had a stake in a project that would eventually intersect with Mark's ambitions. He remained oblivious. Maria held the advantage without revealing it. Her nights were still filled with occasional memories of the betrayal, the tears, the whispered insults, but they no longer debilitated her. They fueled her. She used them to build discipline and patience. She smiled quietly when she thought of how Mark once dismissed her as too small. The same woman he mocked was now quietly standing on a foundation he could not even comprehend. She knew the moment of reckoning would arrive. It would not be loud. It would not be chaotic. It would be undeniable, and it would change everything. Maria learned that the true measure of strength was not in confronting those who hurt you, but in quietly building a life they could never touch, and in the quiet of her small Lagos apartment. As sunlight poured in, she finally understood that survival was sweeter than revenge, that power built slowly could never be stolen, that a woman who cries alone can one day stand taller than the man who made her weep. The return of the past months passed, and Maria Williams had begun to rebuild herself quietly. Her life moved at her own pace. She walked through Lagos streets now with a quiet confidence, not the kind that sought attention, but the kind that came from surviving the worst betrayal a woman could endure. One afternoon, while consulting at a client's office, she saw him, Mark, standing near the entrance with a woman by his side. Her heart stopped for a moment, not out of hope, but because the past had returned unexpectedly. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in months, he seemed unsettled. She remembered every detail of the day he left, every word, every laugh, every insult that told her she was too small. She walked past him, calmly pretending not to notice, yet feeling every memory strike like a sharpened knife. Mark's face changed from casual to confusion to forced composure. His carefully constructed confidence faltered for the first time. Maria felt a small, cold satisfaction, not from revenge, but from recognition she had survived and grown. He had not noticed her strength. She continued her meeting, calmly correcting figures, pointing out risks that others ignored. Mark watched silently, realizing she was no longer the woman he could control. He had underestimated her intelligence, her patience, her resilience. That night he could not sleep. He replayed her calm expression, the way she had commanded the room without raising her voice. The woman he mocked for tears, for weakness, was now standing silently above him in terms of knowledge and influence. He began sending messages, initially casual, checking in, wanting to reconnect. Maria read them quietly. She felt a wave of old emotion, but also the clarity that came from knowing her own worth. She did not respond immediately. She let him wait. She let him realize slowly what he had lost. The flashbacks came anyway. The nights spent pleading for his attention, the mornings crying quietly in bed. She remembered them fully and allowed herself to acknowledge the pain without letting it rule her the next week. Mark tried to approach her business subtly, offering partnerships, investments. She smiled calmly, without words. It's not because she enjoyed his discomfort, but because she understood the timing of life and justice. She had worked silently for months, building a foundation he could never dismantle. She held stakes in ventures he now sought her advice on without his knowledge. Each interaction reminded him of the woman he once dismissed. He began obsessing over her past decisions, realizing too late how carefully she had built her empire quietly. The contrast between them was stark. She was strong, steady, unshakable. He was anxious, distracted, seeking validation he no longer deserved. Maria continued mentoring, quietly advising small traders and entrepreneurs, helping them build without anyone knowing the depth of her own achievements. She moved through Lagos with measured calm, her nights no longer filled with silent tears, but with quiet planning for the future. She understood that the moment for confrontation or revelation would come at the perfect time. That moment was not yet. She relished in her patience, in her strength, in the fact that she had become untouchable, not in arrogance, but in survival. Not for revenge, but for the peace she had earned. She knew the day would come when Mark would finally see the woman he betrayed and laugh at no one else but himself. And in that quiet realization, Maria finally felt a sense of empowerment stronger than anger, stronger than revenge. The woman who was once mocked and abandoned was now standing, silently tall, a living testament to resilience and the power of patience. The moment of reckoning, Mark's world began to crumble quietly but unmistakably. Thought he was untouchable, living his life with Lillian, smiling at parties, flaunting wealth and power. But Maria Williams had grown into someone he could no longer ignore. One afternoon, news reached him indirectly that a major project he had pursued for months had unexpected ownership ties. To his shock, the controlling interest rested with Maria. She had never announced it publicly. She had never flaunted it. She had built her foundation quietly, meticulously, without anyone noticing. The realization hit him like a punch in the chest. Every deal, every negotiation he had boasted about now intertwined with her influence and control. He began retracing her steps, analyzing everything he had dismissed as trivial. He remembered her quiet nights working tirelessly, the years she stayed silent, the tears he mocked. He realized he had never truly known her strength. He sent messages, at first casual, then desperate. "At night I know what you have done," he typed. "I see now what I ignored." But Maria read them calmly. She felt no rush to respond. Not because she was cruel, but because she understood the timing of reckoning. The betrayal she endured had been deep and long, but her patience had built a power he could not overcome. His world began to shift. Investors questioned terms. Timelines stretched. He felt frustration gnaw at him in ways he had never expected. He called Linda, seeking comfort, but she noticed the distance, the preoccupation, the quiet obsession with Maria's rise. Their relationship faltered, not from infidelity, but from the truth he had ignored all along. Meanwhile, Maria's life moved forward silently but steadily. She closed deals, executed plans, expanded her influence. Her nights were still haunted occasionally by memories of betrayal, but those memories no longer weakened her. They reminded her of the woman she refused to become. She met with clients, investors, and entrepreneurs with confidence and precision. Her calm presence commanded respect silently. Her achievements were never about proving Mark wrong, but proving to herself that survival and growth could coexist. She noticed when people whispered about her resilience. When they realized she had achieved more than expected, she smiled softly, knowing the secret was patience, not exposure. Then came the private meeting that would alter everything. Mark arrived cautiously in her office, asking for a partnership he underestimated her confidence and underestimated her knowledge. She observed him silently, noting the tension, the unease, the realization dawning in his eyes. Finally, she spoke calmly, without anger, without need to justify. "I have never needed your approval," he swallowed, hard, realizing no apology could undo the years he dismissed her strength. That day he saw clearly the consequences of his betrayal, not in anger or confrontation, but in quiet dominance. Maria had achieved without noise, without begging. She held the leverage he once thought he controlled. He could only watch as the woman he laughed at silently turned every mockery into a monument of power. That evening, Maria returned home, reflecting on the moment. The trauma had not vanished, but it had transformed. Into clarity and resolve, she realized that the true measure of victory was not in public humiliation, but in the quiet empowerment she had earned by surviving betrayal, growing stronger, and remaining untouchable. The will reading Maria Williams had waited patiently for the day the truth would finally surface. The inheritance her family had quietly protected for decades was about to be revealed. She had endured betrayal, humiliation, tears, and years of quiet. Rebuilding for this moment, the morning of the will reading arrived, bright and clear. Lagos sunlight reflected off the polished windows of the lawyer's office. She entered calmly, dressed modestly but elegantly, her chest tight with anticipation, her hands clutching the envelope that contained documents she had never opened fully before. Family members, friends, and distant relatives gathered around, some whispered speculations. Others eyed her curiously. Mark was absent. He had no idea of what was about to unfold. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. The words seemed slow at first, then sharper as the names and shares were disclosed. Maria listened quietly, not reacting until her name was mentioned. She inherited the majority of the family business assets, the estate, investments, and properties that had long been a source of power and influence. She felt a wave of vindication, but not triumph. It was deeper than that. It was relief. The room fell silent, whispers spreading. Quickly, Mark had no knowledge of her stake, no idea that the woman he mocked as weak and powerless now held everything he thought he could claim. The flashbacks returned, the betrayal, the laughter, the nights she cried silently, the humiliation of his mockery returned to her mind, but this time tempered by calm clarity. She had survived without seeking revenge publicly, without confrontation. She had built her power quietly and deliberately. The lawyer continued, detailing the distribution of wealth. Her cousins, her sister Lillian, now looked at her differently, realizing the woman they dismissed had become the central figure of influence. Mark's absence was glaring. He could not undo the work Maria had done. He could not claim what was never his. His pride would not allow him to accept that he had underestimated her completely. Meanwhile, Maria absorbed the moment fully. She felt not arrogance, but a sense of completion, a chapter closed that had been painful and long. She remembered the nights spent doubting her worth, the mornings crying silently alone, the moments she almost surrendered to despair. Each step of betrayal had led to this careful, unshakable ascent. She looked around at the family watching her and felt a quiet satisfaction, not in humiliation, but in truth. The woman who was cheated on, laughed at, and abandoned now held the power she had always deserved. That evening, Maria returned home, reflecting on how far she had come. She realized revenge was never her goal. Her goal had been survival, growth, and dignity. She sat quietly writing in her notebook, acknowledging the pain and betrayal while also recognizing her resilience. Inheritance was symbolic not only of wealth, but of the strength she had cultivated through trauma and patience. It was a testament to the woman she had become, someone who could endure heartbreak, betrayal, humiliation, and emerge stronger, someone who could stand in Lagos confidently and know her worth, without relying on the recognition of the man who once dismissed her in that quiet moment. Maria understood fully that the most powerful revenge is not anger or exposure, it is transformation. In mastery over one's own life, and in the silence of her apartment, she allowed herself a deep breath, finally understanding that she had not only inherited wealth, she had inherited herself fully and completely. The final closure. Maria Williams sat in her Lagos apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the tears, the years spent rebuilding silently now felt like distant echoes of a woman she no longer was. She had inherited everything: the family estate, the business, assets and investments that Mark had thought he could claim. But what mattered most was not the wealth, but the knowledge that she had survived and grown stronger. Her nights no longer carried the heavy burden of crying alone. She remembered them clearly: the humiliation, the mockery of Mark and Lillian, the disbelief that someone she trusted could betray her so completely. But those memories now existed as proof of her endurance, not as chains holding her down. That evening, she decided to gather the people who mattered: her friends, family, and a few key clients. She wanted them to witness the quiet triumph that comes from patience and resilience. They arrived curious, some whispering about the dramatic history. She stood calmly in the center. Welcoming everyone, her presence commanded respect without force. Her confidence radiated because it was earned, not pretended. The conversation drifted naturally toward the will, and the inheritance whispers of shock and awe spread through the room. Maria listened calmly, smiling softly, knowing that she had remained silent for months while building her foundation. Finally, one of her cousins whispered, "I cannot believe she holds everything now." Mark had no idea. Maria nodded quietly, not needing to justify anything. The true lesson was in the process, the years of silent endurance and steady growth. One of her clients spoke up, telling younger women to observe her quietly and learn patience and perseverance. Maria realized that her story was bigger than wealth. It was about the power of surviving betrayal and emerging unbroken. The flashbacks occasionally returned, but now they served as reminders of the woman she refused to become. Bitter, vengeful, desperate, that woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that empowerment comes not from exposing others, but from mastering oneself. Weeks later, Maria learned through whispers that Mark had tried to approach her business, asking for advice, investments, partnerships, but she remained calm and distant. She understood finally that he could not undo the choices he had made, nor could he diminish her accomplishments. She felt no anger, only quiet satisfaction that she had risen above his mockery and betrayal. The trauma had left marks, but it had also built resilience. She had learned to protect herself, to value her own worth, to refuse to be diminished by those who sought to control or mock her. And on a quiet night, she sat alone by the window, listening to the Lagos streets hum. Beneath her apartment, she thought of the woman she once was, the tears, the endless nights of despair, the disbelief that love could be so cruel. She smiled softly, knowing that she had not only survived but had transformed. The greatest revenge had not been in wealth or exposure, but in the peace she had earned. The final closure came not from confrontation, but from knowing that she had inherited not only property, but her dignity, her self-worth, and the power to shape her life without fear or regret. Maria closed her eyes and whispered softly to herself, "I am free, I am enough, I am unstoppable." The city lights reflected her journey, the pain, the growth, the triumph. She had turned betrayal into empowerment, heartbreak into resilience, and mockery into undeniable strength. And in that final moment, she understood fully that the woman who was cheated on, laughed at, and abandoned was now the woman who commanded her life fully and completely.